The camera switched on and the channel greeting rolled out as B-rank Hunter YouTuber Kang Do-chol welcomed his subscribers to the Any Raid channel, where he normally flexed his dungeon runs, and he casually smiled while announcing that today's target was a C+ arachne. He pointed at the cluster of spiders and explained that arachnes always moved like ant colonies and counted as arthropods. Then he shut his eyes in a dramatic moment and said they didn't look like earth spiders at all, because these things normally opened with web spitting instead of rushing straight in. That statement aged badly because the spider immediately charged him, and one of them almost skewered him with its stinger, but Do-chol blocked it and shouted that the plan was ruined and the footage would probably need to be edited out later. The guy behind the camera, our main character, Mung Si-woo, who handled filming and editing, watched in shock and thought there was no universe where arachnes should behave like this, since their fighting style revolved around trapping the opponent with webs first and injecting poison into a helpless target rather than sprinting at prey like lunatics. Do-chol grinned in irritation and rushed forward while promising they would have a little talk later. Then he sliced an arachne apart, followed by another and another, until he jumped into the air and cut the next one cleanly in half before landing on a pile of dead spiders while wondering what had gone wrong when Si-woo had specifically said they spit webs first. Si-woo's face dripped with sweat, as he thought that arachnes would only rush prey if they were in a desperate situation where survival no longer mattered. Do-chol suddenly grabbed Si-woo by the shirt and demanded to know if he planned to keep pretending to be innocent, then punched him in the stomach and yelled that an apology wouldn't fix anything because they had almost died due to him, leaving Si-woo on the ground while he walked away, saying someone without special features like Si-woo was useless. The words hit Si-woo hard, and he narrowed his eyes while remembering how he awakened with an ability that had absolutely no special traits and how it was completely worthless for hunters, forcing him to survive by obsessively analyzing monsters and teaching hunters how to hit weak points properly. Do-chol closed his eyes and muttered that he had almost died because of this bastard, and that the whole squad would have died without his reactions. But the moment he finished speaking, the other members froze and pointed behind him as a massive monster appeared right at his back. The creature lunged, yet Do-chol had already dodged, and the entire squad broke into a terrified sprint because the thing was a huge elite monster that outpaced them easily. While running, Do-chol dropped his sword and realized he needed bait to escape, then glanced at Si-woo and decided he would be the bait before kicking him in the face as Si-woo screamed and shut his eyes. Do-chol turned and said that since Si-woo had provided wrong info, he should deal with the consequences, leaving Si-woo on the ground, gritting his teeth until his eyes widened in horror upon seeing the giant monster standing right in front of him, while his body refused to move. The monster roared with its jaws wide open, and Si-woo's mind instantly drifted back to the hospital, where his mother lay in a bed, reaching toward him and telling him he had to protect his younger sister, and that memory hit him so hard that he snapped back and realized he absolutely could not die here. He grabbed the sword with shaking hands and told himself he had to survive for his sister as the monster drew close, and he swung the katana with everything he had, while yelling that he would survive no matter what. Suddenly, a violent explosion erupted and threw him backward, and when he looked to the side, he saw a young blonde man in a red cloak standing with a raging aura while wiping sweat from his chin, just as another explosion thundered behind them. The blonde man glanced back while a guy covered in tattoos with a purple aura shouted that he would find his opponent anyway before leaping forward, and a gray-haired fighter charged his fist with gathered energy while yelling that his opponent needed to stop running. The man in red swung as both two clashed so fiercely that Si-woo could only watch from the sidelines, questioning who these people were and why they were fighting. Then a massive explosion shook everything again, and he covered his face while trying to understand what was happening as both fighters were knocked back. He stared at their faces and realized these were the kinds of monsters who could make even elite creatures tremble, then watch them move at an impossible speed. As the man in red attacked again, and shockwaves burst across the battlefield, the villain grinned with sick confidence and smashed the red-cloaked man into a rock with a blast that set everything ablaze. The blonde man wiped his face again, saying they still had a long way to go before anything ended. He aimed his hand forward to charge an attack, while the villain charged his own, and both fired massive blasts that collided and filled the entire area with blinding energy, as the villain yelled that neither of them would walk away unharmed, but the blonde only smiled and said he didn't care. Then he turned toward Si-woo and said he had left this possibility open, which stunned Si-woo because the man apologized for dragging him into this mess, while the villain sneered and said they were all going to die here as the energy kept building. Another explosion erupted, then another, each one shaking the ground as the blonde smiled while the villain screamed in agony, and Si-woo barely kept himself standing as a shockwave almost slammed into him. At that moment, the blonde man said he would leave something for him, and a shield appeared in front of Si-woo just in time to block the explosion. The cave was completely dark, and the only light came from a faint fire, while Si-woo stood there untouched, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. He lifted his head in confusion, then stepped back and felt something under his shoe before glancing down to see a working smartphone lying on the ground, as if someone had casually dropped it there. He picked it up, wondering why a random phone would even be inside this cave, and right then a notification pinged, announcing the confirmation of a new manager. A connection check started on its own, and the system declared that the manager position change was now complete as an unfamiliar aura wrapped around Siwoo, making his eyes sparkle with sudden intensity. The screen shifted into a GodTube splash animation that greeted him like he was some new recruit stepping into a job he didn't even know he had. Meanwhile, outside the cave, sunlight hit the exhausted crew as they sat on the ground breathing heavily, while Dochol lowered his head and muttered about how insanely lucky he was to survive an elite monster in a measly C+ dungeon. His teammates cheered him up, saying they only lived because of him, and even praised the idea of using Siwoo as bait like it was some big brain play, which made Dochol grin proudly and claim he had obviously planned for that outcome. That confidence cracked instantly when his eyes shot wide open after Siwoo suddenly appeared behind him, with a fist already mid-swing and inches from smashing his face. Though Dochol managed to block it with his elbow at the last second, he slapped Siwoo back and reminded him he was only an F rank, causing blood to drip from Siwoo's mouth, while Dochol smirked and said he should be grateful he survived, because he honestly didn't want to bother finding a new editor. Siwoo stared up at him and asked if Dochol seriously believed he would keep working for the guy who literally tried to kill him, but Dochol jabbed him with an elbow again and claimed Siwoo had been the one begging and crying for money to pay his sister's medical bills, insisting that he helped him purely from generosity, so Siwoo owed him loyalty. Siwoo brushed his hand away and picked up the camera, explaining that he had the entire clip of Dochol abandoning him to die, and that posting it would definitely pull massive views. Dochol shut his eyes and said he could just kill him right here. But Siwoo narrowed his own eyes and pointed out that Dochol would go straight to prison and lose his entire hard-earned channel the moment he did that. The hunter's eyes went red with rage as he warned that if the video ever got uploaded anywhere, Siwoo's sister wouldn't be safe. After he spat out the threat, he turned away and shouted that he would just find a new editor. But Siwoo frowned and told him that Dochol had no idea what would happen to him if he even thought about touching his sister. After some time, Siwoo sat alone in his room studying the strange phone he had picked up earlier, and he tapped through the interface while wondering how a platform like this even existed when it let anyone upload whatever they wanted. He kept scrolling and noticed that out of all the channels available, the ones dominating the platform were hunter channels, where he saw knights battling Lucifer, Thor wrestling the world serpent, and even mythical gods showing up like regular content creators. He stared at the screen, trying to process whether these beings were actually controlling their channels, and he remembered the man in the red cloak while wondering why that guy had given him this phone in the first place. He set the device down for a moment because everything felt overwhelmingly confusing, then rested his hand on his chin while imagining what it meant if gods were actually running channels the same way influencers used YouTube. He cracked a small smile, thinking that gods probably started with at least 1 million followers just by existing, and he picked the phone back up saying it didn't look too bad, and maybe he should try messing around with it. He opened a channel belonging to a Chinese sage, and the system suddenly told him he could watch a lecture to participate, which would grant the S+ rank trait called Insight. Siwoo lifted his eyebrows in shock as another notification appeared, saying he had subscribed to Zhuge Liang, the legendary Chinese strategist from the Three Kingdoms era, and immediately, the system declared that he had obtained S+ Insight. A bead of sweat rolled down his cheek because S+ traits were considered theoretical classifications rather than real, and he remembered the 13 heroes who fought the Demon Lord, since people speculated those figures might have possessed S+ abilities. He looked down at his phone again, wondering if he had somehow gained that level of power just by hitting subscribe, then checked his hand, expecting some kind of instant change, yet feeling nothing at all. He rubbed his chin again and assumed the trait probably enhanced observation and intelligence, making it hard to notice immediately. Then he saw a channel run by Hercules who was offering free personal training showing how to uproot Zeus's entire house, and Siwoo hit subscribe thinking he might feel the difference afterward. The system instantly declared he had obtained SS rank superhuman strength, and Siwoo accidentally smashed the table with a light tap, destroying his laptop, and leaving him speechless at the possibility of actually gaining an SS rank trait. He folded his arms in disbelief because he had achieved an SS rank trait just by subscribing, and he clutched his head and yelled that he had absolutely no idea what was going on with GodTube at this point. The system suddenly informed him that insight had increased slightly due to his constant thinking, reaching 0.1%, which made him glance at the phone and wonder if he needed to reach 100% to fully master the ability. He clicked on Hercules' training video and watched a massive crowd react as the hero ripped a stone pillar straight from the ground then squatted with it while yelling about how amazing everything felt as the earth around him cracked under the pressure. Hercules lifted the column overhead and roared with ridiculous strength, leaving Siwoo's jaw hanging open before he quickly pressed unsubscribe, saying now he understood why Hercules had only one subscriber and that he could never do something like that. The system refused his attempt to unsubscribe, and Hercules pointed directly at him while shouting that he could come anytime he wanted, but leaving was impossible, which made Siwoo grin in disbelief, wondering why the hell he wasn't allowed to unfollow the guy. Suddenly his phone rang and Dochol's name showed up, making Siwoo glare at the screen and question why that bastard was calling him after everything that happened. Dochol sat on a chair talking casually and said he thought Siwoo had blocked him, while Siwoo coldly told him to just say what he wanted. Yet Dochol smirked and claimed he knew Siwoo had no other place to go. Siwoo held the phone to his ear, while Dochol explained he had called about some business and told Siwoo not to act hostile because they had worked together for a long time. But Siwoo snapped back, telling him to hurry and stop wasting his time with useless small talk. Dokyo leaned back, saying that the SH group wanted to stream together, and he was inviting Siwoo to join the project, which stunned Siwoo enough to imagine their skyscraper headquarters, and recall that SH was Korea's #1 financial company, whose chairman's granddaughter had recently awakened hunter traits. Siwoo lowered his head silently, and guessed they probably entered the monster hunting industry as well. Dochol said the company was expanding and wanted to try new things, and he asked again if Siwoo agreed, but Siwoo refused instantly. His eyes shot open when Dochol suddenly said he would pay him 5,000 won for the video, then asked again if Siwoo wanted to join now, but Siwoo smirked with a sharp expression and refused a second time. A bead of sweat slid down Dochol's cheek as he pointed out the offer was 10 times the usual rate and good for both of them, and he asked Siwoo what amount he wanted. Siwoo smiled and named the price of 50,000. Shocking Dochol into furious yelling that he isn't worth that much, and wondered how Siwoo figured out SH was paying him a lot. Siwoo smiled again, thinking that his insight trait made it obvious why SH wanted to work with him instead of stronger hunters, which scared Dochol enough to ask what he meant. Siwoo explained that the chairman's granddaughter had awakened 2 S-rank traits, and that the chairman wanted her to learn the basics first. He remembered how Dochol hunted monsters, and said hunting was the foundation for all hunters, then recalled the channel footage, and explained their growth past 200,000 subscribers happened because Siwoo had created unique strategies for monster fights. Siwoo tapped his head and said Dochol received the chairman's offer not because of his strength but purely because of Siwoo's knowledge. And although Dochol frowned, saying 50 million was too much, Siwoo's eyes widened and he asked if the guy really didn't want to pay. Dochol grinned nervously and stuttered, but Siwoo tossed the phone onto the table, saying Dochol could try handling things alone and that otherwise he would need to start looking for someone else. The next day, Siwoo and Dochol stood inside a B-rank dungeon, and Siwoo asked when the rest of the payment would finally be transferred, while Dochol stared at his phone and said he would send everything once the raid ended. They both turned around as Han Charin, the granddaughter of SH's chairman, approached and confidently announced she was ready to join their raid, which made Siwoo's eyes widen because she was unbelievably beautiful, and he quietly thought getting close to someone like her would be insanely difficult. The team moved deeper into the dungeon, and Siwoo told himself he just needed to finish the job and secure his money. But they stopped when they saw a massive monster with a purple aura standing ahead of them. Charon stepped forward and identified it as a black troll, while Dochol repeated the same information Siwoo had once told him about how black trolls had almost immortal regeneration, and inexperienced hunters could easily die if they didn't understand how to kill them. He imagined the troll's attack pattern and repeated the standard strategy everyone knew, which required tearing apart the black troll's whole body before destroying the heart and cutting its head off before regeneration kicked in. Before he even finished explaining, Charon went straight for her sword and sprinted forward without hesitation, leaping into the air with zero doubt in her eyes as she plunged her blade directly into the monster's heart before ripping it out and immediately blowing off its head. She turned around, telling the stunned guys that it was easy, and Dochol cheerfully said he hadn't expected her to execute the technique so flawlessly with minimal experience, praising her like a stereotypical S-rank prodigy. Charon flicked the blood off her blade while Siwoo noticed the weapon's black shine and asked about its cost, since he had heard rumors about that sword named Aurelian, and Charon casually responded that it was around 20 billion, which left both guys with their mouths hanging open. She pointed toward the passage, telling them to continue since they shouldn't end the raid with only one black troll, and an hour later they were still inside the dungeon with blood pooling under Charon's feet as she mentioned she was beginning to understand things better. She turned around saying there were no trolls left so they could end here, while Dochol bowed and praised her work, although inside he panicked because he thought this would be his chance to impress the Hunters Guild, but he had achieved nothing and now believed Siwoo had basically robbed him of 50,000. Siwoo noticed Dochol sweating in panic and smirked to himself, yet the expression vanished when a violent roar echoed through the dungeon as something massive approached. Charon looked upward, trying to see what caused it, and Dochol immediately tried to act knowledgeable, saying the creature's size meant it had to be an elite monster, but Siwoo mentally realized this wasn't just a regular elite, because a gigantic troll landed in front of them, with glowing red eyes and viciously sharp teeth, revealing it was the dungeon boss. The monster raised its fist to crush them, and Charon prepared for combat while blocking the first attack with her sword, as Dochol froze with his mouth open, and the rest of the team fled in panic. The monster smirked while watching them, then hurled Charon backward, and she crashed to the ground before the beast launched rocks toward the escaping team, injuring 2 members instantly. Dochol gasped for air as fear overwhelmed him, and he ran forward thinking he had to escape before he died, but a massive shadow swallowed him, as the boss loomed directly above him, and he whispered that he was already dead. Charon saved him by blocking the attack, although the monster still struck the ground hard enough to throw her into a wall as it prepared a second attack. Charon's eyes snapped open as she realized she needed to dodge, and she sprinted along the monster's arm, dodging the swing as she landed on its neck, delivering rapid strikes, but the boss whipped around, showing almost no damage, which left her stunned. The troll launched a fast punch, and Charon jerked backwards several times before jumping away, as dust exploded everywhere from the impact, and she struggled to keep holding off the overwhelming force. Siwoo looked up and realized they had no hope of winning because even though Charon held 2 S-rank traits, she was still an inexperienced rookie, facing a terrifying boss that had fought countless times before. The troll laughed while unleashing a barrage of attacks, and Siwoo watched from the side, thinking his only option might be abandoning Charon and running, because if he stayed, he would die. He shook with fear as he remembered he had SS strength from GodTube and wondered if he should test it, but before deciding he saw Dochol sprint past him with terror on his face, while Siwoo stared in disappointment and disbelief as the man ran for his life. Meanwhile, Charon kept blocking the troll's relentless blows with sheer willpower, and a bead of sweat ran down Siwoo's cheek as he realized they still couldn't win, freezing in absolute terror, while thinking he needed to escape or he would die. He dashed to the side, deciding to run, but the moment he turned back, his fear spiked so sharply that he screamed loudly and drew the monster's attention directly toward him. He stared ahead with a tense expression, knowing money and fame meant nothing if he died here, and the boss roared while swinging another massive fist, as Charon barely held on with gritted teeth. Siwoo clenched his fist and charged it with a bright blue aura as he ran forward, telling himself that if he ran now, he'd be no better than that coward Dochol. His punch slammed into the monster's arm so hard it kicked the limb backward, enraging the boss, and leaving Charon shocked because she had no idea how Siwoo managed to deflect the attack. She looked at his back, glowing with a blue aura, while a translucent warrior outlined in blue appeared behind him like a guardian spirit, and Siwoo lowered his face, taking a deep breath as bright energy built up in his hand. The monster punched upward, breaking through the ceiling, then swung again with a heavy strike, but Siwoo blocked it with the SS strength he had gained, and the impact exploded into a shockwave that rippled across the area, while the monster snarled and bared its teeth. Siwoo held the block while shouting that they needed to act now, and Charon heard him and shot upward into the air above the monster, while swinging her sword with perfect timing. The monster opened its mouth in shock as she landed on its chest and drove her sword deep into it, before leaping upward again and performing precise spinning movements in mid-air until she landed on its shoulder and sprinted to its neck, slicing the head clean off with one perfect cut, before landing behind the monster as its massive body began to fall. She and Siwoo stared at the monster's corpse, while Siwoo finally felt relief that they had defeated it, and a system window appeared, stating his insight had increased. Blood poured from the troll's neck, while Siwoo thought about how boss monsters often had double transformations, meaning this physical transformation was completely natural for a creature of its type. The monster's severed head began growing back onto its neck with sickening cracking noises, and at an unexpected moment, it grabbed Charon in its massive hand while she screamed in pain, trying to pull herself free, as Siwoo watched helplessly, thinking that if she died here he wouldn't be able to save her at all. The monster's pupils tightened in shock because it clearly hadn't expected what it saw next. As Siwoo pushed its fingers apart with all his strength, Charon twisted in agony with one eye squeezed shut and told him to run, while Siwoo kept holding on and shouted back that she needed to aim directly for the heart. She pushed against the giant fingers and finally slipped out of its grip before falling to the ground, then lifted her head with a fierce expression, saying she understood everything, grabbing her sword as she sprinted toward the monster with full determination. Siwoo was still holding the monster's fingers apart with glowing eyes, while yelling for her to trust him and attack, and the monster snapped its head toward the sound of her footsteps, trying to move its arm but failing when it realized its hand couldn't budge. When it looked to the side, it saw Siwoo still gripping its fingers tightly as he wrapped his own hand around them and flashed a wide, confident smile straight into the monster's stunned gaze. The beast opened its mouth in rage, while Charon charged forward with her sword, slicing the monster's entire arm lengthwise with incredible speed, and leaving a streak of blue light behind her as she leaped upward and pierced one of its hearts. Siwoo stared forward, his eyes shot wide open as he yelled that the ogre had 2 hearts. Charon gasped because she hadn't known that detail, then dodged the monster's counterattack with a backward dash, while Siwoo thought she would probably figure it out using her instincts anyway. Her eyes gleamed like cosmic light as she focused and lunged straight toward the monster, swinging her sword again while lowering her katana with her mouth open in determination, before driving a precise strike into the second heart. The monster erupted into a pained scream. Blue aura formed around Siwoo's leg, and he sprinted forward, wrapped in that glowing energy, while swinging his fist and shouting for the monster to finally stop resisting and die. He jumped high toward the beast, while Charon dropped down at the same moment. And in the monster's final moment, it saw the reflection of Siwoo's glowing fist in its eyes before its skull exploded into shattered fragments. Blue lightning flashed brightly in Siwoo's eyes, while his hand dripped with blood, and a trailing streak of blue light burned behind him. He slowly walked a few steps before collapsing to the ground right in front of Charon, who stared down at him wondering who he really was. A moment later, Siwoo found himself blinking awake inside a completely different room, where a TV hung on the wall beside a clock and a cabinet, and as he pushed himself up from the bunk, he immediately noticed a woman seated in front of him. Charon sat right next to him. She had decided to visit him, and the sudden realization made his cheeks heat up as he stared at her with wide eyes, wondering what she was even doing here. Charon pointed toward the floor and explained that she brought him to the hospital because he had been seriously injured with torn muscles and broken ribs, and she leaned toward him with her legs crossed while asking how he felt, which only made him clench his fists in embarrassment because she was sitting way too close for his heart rate to survive. A bead of sweat crawled down his face as she moved even closer, and the room suddenly felt smaller in a way that made everything more awkward. She placed her hand gently on his forehead, which made his embarrassment spike even harder, and for a moment, the two of them simply looked into each other's eyes, while she kept her hand there with a sparkly curiosity shining through her gaze. Tilting her head a little, she said he seemed to have a fever while he scooted back, and gave a shaky smile as imaginary steam practically poured from his head, and she then asked his name since they had never properly introduced themselves. With red cheeks, he wondered how she didn't know it already, since she must have seen his information when he was brought into the hospital. But Charon looked away awkwardly and said she had wanted to hear it from him directly. Siwoo tilted his head forward in surprise because it felt like she had somehow read his thoughts, and he realized that her S-rank sixth sense probably allowed her to pick up on things without him saying a word. She turned to face him fully again and said that he was probably still in a daze from just waking up, but she wanted to make him a proposal. And Siwoo leaned closer, asking what kind of proposal she meant. With her hands resting neatly on her knees, she asked if he wanted to join her team, and Siwoo stared back into her eyes, wondering if she only wanted him because he fought an ogre earlier. Then everything froze for a second, as she casually mentioned offering him an annual salary of 1 billion won, making him snap upright, with his mouth wide open and hand raised in pure shock, while she added that they would also split all monster loot equally. His grin faded when Charon mentioned hearing about his younger sister suffering from a blood disease, and said her team could cover the medical expenses so he wouldn't have to shoulder the burden, which cast a dark shadow across his expression, as he lowered his head without a word. He eventually lifted his gaze and asked what he had done to deserve something like this, and Charon leaned in slightly as she explained with a confident look that she wanted him to create strategies for her, finishing with the fact that she needed someone who could plan out tactics for every monster she would face from now on. Night finally settled outside, and the ward fell into complete silence while Siwoo lay on his pillow, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was stupid for refusing her offer at all. The memory replayed in his mind like a soft rewind, showing him sitting across from Charon while explaining the reason for his refusal, and she had listened with calm surprise before telling him she understood perfectly. She added that if he ever changed his mind, he only needed to tell her because she still owed him for saving her life, and she planned to repay that debt by covering his sister's medical bills. But Siwoo kept thinking that before accepting any deal, he needed to test what GodTube could really do, since it belonged to gods who casually turned S-rank hunters into background characters without breaking a sweat. Turning his head toward the side, he looked at his little sister sleeping with her eyes closed, and he knew he couldn't chain himself to a decision too fast when her future depended on something more unpredictable. She lay motionless on her back, while he remembered the day she was caught in a sudden dungeon outbreak long ago, ending up with a rare blood disease modern medicine couldn't cure, only suppress. His mind filled with images of thick medical books, jars of rare ingredients, glowing blue crystals, and old monster skulls displayed on red cloth, all of them expensive beyond belief, yet necessary for any true cure. Opening his laptop, he muttered that he would need an insane amount of money, and in the meantime he still had to finish editing today's video. On the screen, Do Chol stood frozen as Charon fought the monster, And Siwoo's eyes widened again, remembering how she casually mentioned her sword being worth 20 billion. He scratched his chin, thinking he could forge equipment and sell it himself, imagining a cinematic shot of him as a blacksmith forging a blade with supernatural strength, earning billions in record time. But as he lifted his phone, he made a frustrated face because he only had one free subscription left, and if he wanted another one, he would need to pay 1 million won. He stared at the GodTube page where Hephaestus held a massive hammer, and Siwoo realized subscribing to the god of smithing was the only way to learn metallurgy and weapon crafting. He pressed the subscribe button with a dramatic tap and stared at his phone in shock as a system window appeared telling him he had obtained SS-class metallurgy. Inside Hephaestus's forge, piles of ingots and ore filled the background, and the god's hand slammed a blacksmith hammer against Mjolnir, while shouting with blazing eyes that weapon upgrades required absolute courage and no fear of failure. Siwoo flinched as Hephaestus roared that people these days had zero guts and needed to accept that their weapons might break. Several system windows appeared stating that his incorrect knowledge of metallurgy had been fixed and that his mastery of god-level metallurgy had increased. The next morning arrived and the scene moved to a quiet street where a small playground stood under the early sunlight, and Siwoo hung from the horizontal bar with one hand before pulling himself up using only that single arm with steady strength. Two nurses passing by looked at each other in surprise and whispered about how much his body had improved, saying the doctor mentioned that Siwoo's recovery was unbelievably fast even for a hunter and that he could be discharged tomorrow. Siwoo looked away, pretending not to listen, though he absorbed every word and reflected on how he was being discharged way sooner than he expected, since he assumed he would need weeks of training before being allowed to leave. Sweat rolled down his face as system windows flickered in front of him saying his skills were improving, and he visualized his muscle fibers stretching, while thinking that reckless use of super strength would destroy his arms just like last time. So training consistently was the only way to prevent it. Suddenly, his younger sister appeared behind him and called out gently, leaning forward with her hands folded behind her back, and saying she heard he would be discharged the next day, which made him laugh awkwardly and admit it was true. She placed her hand over her chest and closed her eyes while explaining how worried she had been when he first arrived at the hospital, because he looked like he was in critical condition. Then she opened her eyes slightly with a sad expression and glanced away. Still looking aside, she awkwardly pointed out that doctors originally said he would be hospitalized for months, yet he was somehow leaving after just a week, and Siwoo smiled with his eyes closed, thinking she was simply upset that he was getting discharged before her. He stepped closer and placed his hand on her head, telling her not to slack on treatment just because he wasn't around, and reassuring her she didn't need to worry about the medical expenses for now. She nodded and mentioned that she already knew she was receiving free treatment thanks to Charon Uni, and Siwoo made a painfully awkward face as he heard Charon's name with a weird expression, while his sister smiled brightly, saying, Charon asked her to call her Unni, since she had no younger siblings. Siwoo looked down and asked when that even happened, and whether his sister had ever met Charon in the hospital before, scratching his head awkwardly as she explained that Charon visited them from time to time and checked on him during his training sessions. He blinked in surprise while crossing his arms because he had never once seen her there, and his sister said Charon even asked how he was doing, which made the girl blush slightly as she hid her smile. Siwoo wondered why a busy hunter like Han Charon would still come to visit him, and figured she probably wanted to recruit him, but his sister teased that Charon likely came because she liked him, which made him turn away with an awkward smile and deny it. She added that he was more popular than he thought, because the nurses constantly talked about him, and he glanced away with embarrassment, telling her to stop saying pointless things and hurry back to the hospital, because he had somewhere important to go. He clenched his fist with determination, lifted his head, and declared confidently that he was going to make money. Sometime later, Siwoo stepped inside the dungeon and looked around with a tense breath, assuming the nervousness kicking in was because this was the first time he would be hunting monsters completely alone. He clenched his hand into a fist and reminded himself to calm down, but his gaze shifted to the side when he sensed movement and realized the enemies were probably already here. A swarm of monsters suddenly appeared and began throwing projectiles, forcing him to sprint away, while he grinned slightly because he already knew these kinds of monsters acted in groups, yet he hadn't expected this many to show up at once. The goblins rushed toward him with weapons raised, and he dodged the first attack before launching his own punch, which instantly shattered one of them into pieces. He squinted one eye in disbelief because the monster had exploded way too easily, while the others froze in terror as he slowly approached with his head lowered and a sharp grin stretching across his face, telling them to hurry up and attack already. The scene shifted to a smithy filled with the bodies of monsters on the floor, and Siwoo wondering how much a master craftsman could make out of all these materials. The blacksmith, standing in front of him, shouted in frustration, asking what Siwoo expected him to do, since he had asked for proper ingredients, not a pile of scraps. The blacksmith, Seo Palguang, frowned and said he would at least teach him how to smelt, and ordered him to follow. Swinging his hammer with practiced force, The master shouted that he needed to pay attention because the hammer wasn't just about strength, and he thought back to how he had spent most of his youth studying metallurgy. He struck the blade and explained that even with high-grade materials, creating A-rank or S-rank equipment was never easy. Siwoo stared with wide eyes as Palguang handed him the hammer and said he had demonstrated enough, so now it was Siwoo's turn. Watching from behind with his arms crossed, Palguang remembered how Siwoo never asked him to forge equipment, never asked to become an apprentice, and didn't even try joining a guild in exchange for rent. Instead, he simply asked to borrow the workshop, and the blacksmith had agreed, purely out of curiosity. Frowning slightly, the blacksmith realized he needed only one look at this young man holding a hammer to know what kind of talent stood in front of him. As he watched Siwoo swing the tool, he thought about how modern people treated metallurgy like a simple game skill, even though it had taken him 20 years to reach his current level. And worse, Siwoo kept checking his phone like he had watched enough videos to assume the craft would be easy, which made Palguang conclude that the kid was completely mistaken. The smithy door burst open as a girl entered with a bright smile, loudly announcing her arrival. The master, sitting on a chair, asked if it was Soeun, and she confirmed it by joking that no one else from the village would willingly come to a forge that smelled this terrible. Palguang told her she could let someone else handle this errand, since she always had to come in person, but she placed a hand on her hip and said she came herself because he was the best blacksmith in Korea. The blacksmith chuckled and said she sure knew how to flatter like a proper businesswoman. Soeun grinned while explaining she represented a company that only dealt with top-tier products, then reached into her backpack and said she brought the ingredients he requested, so now they only needed to discuss the price. Palguang answered that the blade was already wrapped in cloth because its edge was sharp and she needed to check it carefully, and she looked up, talking about some new delivery. She told with excitement that they were supplying equipment to the SH group this time, but the constant hammering noise was driving her crazy. She looked toward Siwoo and shouted at him to be quiet since they were trying to talk, crossing her arms while trying to figure out what he was even making. Picking up the blade, she joked, "If this thing could seriously be called a weapon." The blacksmith reacted immediately, asking what she meant, and Soeun said the blade was blunt, and the shape was dull, making it unusable. Palguang's mouth fell open as he told her that that weapon was made from goblin and kobold skeletons. Her eyes widened instantly, while the blacksmith crossed his arms and explained that the material was in terrible condition and the blade was made by someone who held a hammer for the first time today. She asked if he had accepted an apprentice, and he frowned while saying he tried. The blacksmith realized the kid was too unbelievable for someone holding a hammer for the first time. The memory of the tool in Siwoo's hand flashed in his mind, along with the moment the young man struck the blade with confidence. Crossing his arms again, the master admitted he had never seen anyone forge a weapon out of material this bad. Yet this same guy refused the offer to become his apprentice. Soeun immediately turned toward Siwoo as he wiped sweat from his forehead, while she stared at him thoughtfully, trying to figure out who exactly this person was. After some time, Siwoo finally completed forging a sleek black spear, and the moment he picked it up, several system notifications popped up, announcing that his god-level metallurgy skill had increased by 0.4%. He smiled with a rush of pride because he had actually managed to create a real weapon, then immediately thought how he was supposed to sell it now. Soeun stepped up behind him and asked whether he genuinely planned to sell that blade, then held out her hand while introducing herself as Kim Soeun, a representative of the Soeun Company. Siwoo looked toward her and realized he had already heard about the company since it specialized in the hunting business and valued trust and reliability, making her a well-known figure in the entire industry. Soeun smirked as she explained that their company only dealt with the best products in Korea, so if he intended to sell the equipment, they would buy it immediately. Siwoo closed his eyes for a moment before asking how much they could offer, and she replied that she could pay 1 million won for a single weapon of that quality. He didn't waste a second and went straight back to hammering as if possessed, forging weapons non-stop, while Soeun used that growing pile of equipment to finalize a successful contract with the SH Group. Back at the workshop, Soeun beamed with excitement and exclaimed that the situation was absolutely magnificent before turning to Siwoo and announcing that their company had officially signed the contract with SH Group. She pointed toward him and shouted that everything changed from the moment they met him because the quality of the equipment was flawless, and without him she would have ended up in serious trouble. She grabbed his hands and thanked him earnestly, saying that if he ever needed anything, he just had to say the word and she would make it happen. Then she pulled out her phone and told him to check his bank account. Siwoo lifted his own phone to his face and froze when he saw the notification showing an active balance of 280 million won. Later that day, Siwoo sat on a chair, staring at his phone while replaying the number on his balance, recalculating it just to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. And as he brought his hand to his face, he realized he finally had the chance to buy a subscription on the GodTube platform. Right after that thought hit him, notifications flashed across the screen revealing 3 legendary channels: Hua Tuo, the mythical healer; Hippocrates, the father of medicine, and Hyo-jun, the master of traditional Eastern medicine. Siwoo quickly realized that subscribing to all three cost 300 million won per month, and in his current financial state, he could only choose one. He crossed his arms thinking deeply, and his body shook with tension before he covered his face and shouted in frustration. Then, with a sudden burst of reckless courage, his finger slammed down on the subscribe button. The scene shifted back to the workshop, where the blacksmith lifted both hands in disappointment, saying there was nothing to be done since fragile materials were extremely hard to polish, recommending they keep polishing to a bare minimum. So-eun walked in with a bright smile and greeted them. With his eyes closed, Palguang asked why she kept coming here, and she replied casually that she came because of Meng Siwoo. Siwoo looked at her and said he had been waiting for her, which made her blush in confusion as she asked him to repeat himself. He handed her a piece of paper and reminded her of her promise to get anything he needed, and the page contained the full list of supplies. She nodded and looked at the order, which included mountain frankincense, sulfium, saxifrage, 100-year-old jinx, and several expensive medicinal herbs. Still watching her, Siwoo asked whether getting them would be difficult, and she answered that she could secure them, but the price would be heavy. His eyes turned blank when she said the total cost was around 300 million won, though she could give him a 20 million discount. Siwoo thought about how these items were essential for leveling up the divine medical mastery he gained from his new membership, yet it was almost impossible to acquire such materials on his own, since he didn't know where to get them, or whether they were even sold anywhere at all. If So-eun hadn't been here, he would never have a shot at obtaining them. His attention shifted back to her when she asked whether he still wanted to buy everything, and he responded with crying, saying yes. As he rubbed his head, he remembered she had paid him 284 million won earlier, but if he handed back 280 million, leaving him with only 4 million, and by the end of the month, that tiny balance would be wiped out because the subscription cost alone was 100 million. He needed more money immediately. He needed hundreds of millions. Even selling equipment non-stop wouldn't be fast enough. His eyes widened as he suddenly remembered Dochol and the streaming business. And right then, Siwoo decided he would start streaming on YouTube himself. Sometime later, inside the subway, the guy was casually scrolling through his YouTube feed, already annoyed because nothing interesting was showing up, until one thumbnail suddenly caught his eye. The channel name was Conqueror of the World. From the thumbnail itself, it was obvious something was off. The video was supposedly about strategy against hippos. Curious, the man clicked on the video. The scene opened near a small pond filled with water, and somewhere between the hippos, the video's creator was hiding in an extremely weird disguise. Siwoo took off his mask and calmly asked the viewers if they knew that hippos were not aquatic horses. The guy watching was stunned. He honestly couldn't process what he was seeing. He kept wondering what was wrong with this dude, and why the hell he had dressed up like a hippopotamus in the first place. Siwoo then explained that the monsters shown in the video were called hippodons in Korea, while other countries referred to them as hippopotamus. As anyone could already tell, these monsters looked almost exactly like real hippos. He went on to explain that people usually use the Chinese character for horse when referring to hippos, even though hippos don't actually belong to the horse family at all. Hearing that the character for horse was being used for hippopotamuses made the viewer pause for a second, genuinely thinking about that information. Siwoo then explained that they actually belonged to the Bovidae family. To be precise, they belonged to the Artiodactyls. He immediately added that if he went any deeper into the explanation, the viewers would probably get a headache, so he decided to stop right there. Next, Siwoo pulled out a red cloth and said he would show everyone how to tame a hippo. According to him, the first step was provoking the hippo with the red cloth. He casually mentioned that cows aren't actually nervous about the color red, and that the important part was exciting the target instead. At this point, the viewer was completely speechless, genuinely baffled by what he was hearing. Siwoo started waving the red cloth around and yelling at the hippos, trying to grab their attention. At first, the hippos lazily turned their heads toward the strange man, but the moment they noticed the red cloth, something snapped. Their expressions changed instantly. Right after that, the entire herd of hippos charged straight towards Siwoo. Instead of backing down, Siwoo kept luring them closer. When they finally got close enough, he calmly explained the next step on how to defeat a hippopotamus. The second step was apparently to just beat them and catch them. The video only got stranger from there, and the viewer seriously wondered if this was actually his real strategy. Then Siwoo threw the red cloth to the ground and rushed straight into the herd of hippos. He collided with them head-on. As he struck the first hippos, Siwoo shouted, "Rice noodles," and when he hit the second one, he followed up by yelling, "Buckwheat noodles." A short while later, the impossible happened. Siwoo had successfully knocked out every single hippo. He stood there, gave the camera a thumbs up, and asked the viewers what they thought. Was it really that easy? Even though the video had ended, the moments of that collision kept replaying in the young man's head. In the end, Siwoo told the viewers that if they found the strategy useful, they should like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. A massive number of viewers appreciated the video Siwoo had uploaded. The clip about hunting hippos quickly gained traction, hitting 3,628 views, with 243 people subscribing to Siwoo's YouTube channel almost immediately. Xiaowu couldn't help grinning as he checked the results, because this was exactly what he had planned to see, and things didn't stop there. In a very short amount of time, 1,243 users had subscribed to the Conqueror of the World channel, and the hippo hunting video had exploded to 127,000 views. As Siwoo scrolled through the feed, he noticed countless comments laughing at the video. From what he could tell, viewers genuinely loved the concept he had used in his previous upload. Still, he knew this success came largely from getting lucky with the YouTube algorithm. That also meant he couldn't keep hanging around low-level monsters forever. Since things had reached this point, Siwoo decided it was best to strike while the iron was hot. He understood how audience interest worked. Because of high adaptability, stimulation always required increasing intensity to maintain strong attention. That kind of escalation was his specialty. After all, analyzing monsters and developing strategies was literally his job. Reaching 1 million subscribers wasn't just a fantasy. There was only one problem. All of a sudden, Siwoo noticed blood dripping from his nose. Almost immediately after that, an overwhelming wave of fatigue hit him. Fighting to stay upright, he told himself that he still needed to edit the video. Dungeon raiding and deliveries together were clearly too much. In the end, his body gave out. He staggered backward, fell to the floor, hit his head on the table, then painfully struck it again against a chair. Eventually, Siwoo collapsed completely. He had been pushing himself way too hard lately. Sometime later, Siwoo finally regained consciousness. The first thing he wondered was where he was. Then he realized he was staring at the ceiling of his own room. Sitting up on the bed and trying to piece things together, he figured out that he had passed out for a while, and his head was throbbing badly. Still, thanks to Hercules' super strength, it all ended with him barely managing to survive. Pinching his nose, Siwoo muttered that he needed to hurry up and edit the video. He pulled out his phone to check how long he'd been unconscious. To his shock, the time read 4:31 a.m. He realized he had been out cold for an entire day. That was when it hit him. If he kept going like this, he would die from exhaustion before making any real money. Because of that, Siwoo decided it was time to hire an editor. Sometime later, at Cafe Eden, Siwoo sat sipping a cold drink while reviewing suitable candidates. When he had written the job ad, he never expected so many people to apply. Maybe it was because of the high salary. The response was so intense that it felt like an idle audition. The base salary was 3 million won, with additional incentives depending on view count. As expected, money worked better than anything else, which was why he needed to choose someone who would make him the most money. Watching one candidate's sample video, Siwoo gave him a good rating. The sound effects were well-timed and funny, and his editing skills were clearly better than Siwoo's own. But it was already past 1 o'clock. Siwoo was starting to lose patience. Why hadn't this guy shown up yet? All he knew was that the candidate's name was Park Do-aku. Earlier, Siwoo had suggested that the 14th applicant meet him at the cafe at 1 p.m., and the guy had agreed. Even just from his name and the way he spoke, Siwoo had assumed he was an old-school guy. But that actually worked in his favor. Experience was exactly what he needed. Siwoo sent a message to Park Do-aku asking where he was, but the message remained unread. He assumed he was rushing over and hadn't had time to check his phone, so he decided to wait a little longer. But that patience didn't last. Before long, it finally snapped. Siwoo slammed his fist onto the table and muttered, wondering where the bastard was. Right at that moment, the cafe door opened, and someone hurried inside, apologizing for being late. A girl awkwardly asked if he was Mung Siwoo. She introduced herself as Park Do-aku, an aspiring YouTube editor. Seeing a girl standing there completely caught him off guard. He had imagined Park Do-aku to be some kind of gruff, old-school guy. Taking a seat, the girl apologized to Siwoo again. He asked why she was late, and more importantly, why she hadn't even read his message. She explained that she had been editing a video late into the night, then realized she had forgotten to pack her younger brother's picnic lunchbox. Because she was in such a rush afterward, she hadn't had time to read his message before coming straight there. Siwoo asked what she meant by editing a video. Do-aku replied that she was talking about the video she had attached to her application. Siwoo asked if that meant she had edited the video he provided in just 1 day. She corrected him, calmly saying that it hadn't taken her 1 day, but about 3 hours. Hearing that, Siwoo felt a strange kind of shock hit him. He had poured far more time into his own edits. Noticing his reaction, the girl wondered if something was wrong. Siwoo turned toward her. The girl, nervous and afraid, thinking she was about to be scolded, she shut her eyes and braced herself. Instead, Siwoo simply asked when she could start working. The girl apologized again, realizing she had completely misunderstood the situation, and said she could start right away. Siwoo thought about how it usually took him around 8 hours to edit a video. If each video only took her 3 hours, the efficiency alone was insane. He explained that, as stated in the ad, 2 videos per week was the standard. Sometimes he uploaded 3 videos. And if that happened, she would of course be paid extra. Siwoo reached out toward the girl, who was on the verge of tears, and told her that from now on, he would be under her supervision. Overjoyed, the girl slammed her head on the table in agreement, and shouted that she would work hard. Almost immediately after that, panic erupted. People rushed past them, shouting about a nearby underground breach. A warning echoed through the area, announcing that an underground breach had occurred. It was identified as a C-rank breach, and residents in the surrounding area were urgently advised to evacuate as soon as possible. A terrified Dioku shouted at her new boss that they should evacuate immediately, but instead of panicking, he smirked and calmly asked her if she wasn't the one who had just said she could start working right away. Dioku froze, completely unable to follow her boss's train of thought, and quickly apologized. Mangu casually blew a tampon of blood out of his nostril, then turned toward Dioku with that same relaxed smirk still on his face. He handed her his phone and told her to follow him. Confused and nervous, Dioku asked where they were even going. Siwoo simply asked her what she thought. Of course, they were going to make money. The moment Dioku realized where they were headed, she gasped in shock. Even so, she still ran after Siwoo. While moving, Siwoo shouted back at her about the video, reminding her to turn the camera on immediately. Right after that, orcs began pouring out from the dungeon gate. Charging straight toward them, Siwoo yelled, "Rice noodles, large portion," and in the next instant, he ripped a C-rank orc apart with a single blow. Turning toward the camera mid-fight, he reminded viewers not to forget to like and subscribe, and also to turn on notifications. Wiping orc blood off his face, Siwoo wondered to himself if this was finally how he would start making real money. Soon after, a group of hunters arrived at the site of the dungeon breach, and immediately began helping nearby civilians evacuate. Suddenly, they heard a scream, and an orc's severed head flew straight over their heads. The hunters froze in shock, completely confused about what they were witnessing. Right in front of them, a young man was brutally beating orcs with his bare hands while loudly shouting the names of different noodles. Before long, Siwoo finished off every orc that had emerged from the dungeon. He then climbed on top of the pile of bodies, raised his fist into the air, turned to the camera, and once again told viewers to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Back at home, Dioku began editing a new video for her boss. As she worked, she couldn't stop thinking about what she had just witnessed, wondering what the hell was going on and why he was so popular. The comments were filled with laughter at the shocked reactions of people around him, while others marveled at how the conqueror of the world had beaten C-rank monsters with nothing but his bare hands. Many also praised how clean and well-edited the video was. Even after finishing the edit, Dioku still didn't fully understand what was happening, but one thing was clear to her. Her boss was a complete lunatic on YouTube. Covering her face with her hands, Dioku wondered if she would really be able to succeed. Meanwhile, behind her, her younger siblings were eating chicken and happily telling her that it was delicious, making sure to leave some for her as well. They invited her to eat with them. Just then, her younger sister grabbed a chicken leg and declared that it was hers. Her brother immediately reminded her that she had already eaten one and that they should leave it for their sister, Dioku. Watching her younger siblings bicker and care for one another, Dioku smiled softly, finally understanding what she had to do. She had to work hard, at least for the sake of her younger brother and sister. Meanwhile, over at the smithy, our MC continued forging weapons without stopping. After putting in a solid amount of effort, he finally succeeded in crafting a decent sword. This piece of equipment had been made using orc parts obtained from the previous battle. Unlike his earlier attempts, this sword was forged from class materials, which meant it was something he could actually rely on. As the process completed, his divine metallurgy skill increased by 1.4%, reaching a total of 4.43%. The system immediately commented that he had created equipment of decent quality, suitable to be given away for free. Siwoo wasn't exactly thrilled with that remark, but he was still extremely satisfied. An increase of 1.4% was massive, and considering the speed at which his skill was growing, the number itself was ridiculous. Kim Seon was visibly surprised when she saw the blade in Siwoo's hands and praised him, noting that the quality of his weapons kept improving. Palguang, on the other hand, couldn't understand it at all. How could someone who had started practicing metallurgy less than a month ago reach this level already? It made no sense to him. Siwoo simply chuckled and said he still had a long way to go, which was true. He hadn't even mastered a tenth of Hepatitis' skills yet. The girl then turned to Siwoo and asked if he was planning to sell that blade. Siwoo replied that she was right and added that she surely knew how to sell it. Seon told him to just hand everything over to her and reached out for the blade. Palguang watched the exchange silently, clearly not liking what he was seeing. Seon then noticed that Siwoo looked much older today, and Siwoo asked if that was really the case. She smiled and said that lately, the bags under his eyes had almost reached his nose. Siwoo let out an awkward chuckle when he heard that. Seon followed up by saying she had even been confused about whether he was a human or a zombie before, though now he finally looked human again. And honestly, she wasn't wrong. Since Dioku had started editing his videos, the boy had been getting much more sleep. He was still incredibly busy, but things were more manageable. Even though he had paid extra due to the danger last time, he didn't have much money left for expenses or staff. Helping with video shooting wasn't really an editor's job, so he knew he probably should have paid her more. Still, Siwoo had zero complaints about Diogu's editing. She was working extremely hard, and he was genuinely grateful to her. Suddenly, Siwoo remembered something he had forgotten and asked Sion how things were going with the medicinal herbs he had ordered from her earlier. Kim Sion clapped her hands, realizing she had almost forgotten about it too. Right after that, she pulled out a bag and said she had obtained everything he had requested. After all, this was Siwoo's very first request. Siwoo was stunned by how quickly she had gathered everything and admitted that it was incredible. Sion reminded him that her company only sold the best products from Korea. Siwoo wondered what exactly she meant by that, and then asked how much everything would cost. Kim Sion checked the details on her phone and replied that the total came to 212 million won. A flood of numbers flashed through Siwoo's mind. 212 million was an absurd amount of money. Sion then said that since it was Siwoo's request, she would give him a discount and lower the price to 200 million won, but there would be no discount next time. Siwoo thanked Sion sincerely for her help. Sometime later, the boy hopped onto GodTube and started watching Huatuo. In the video, Huatuo explained that herbal medicine referred to purified natural medicines obtained from animal, plant, or mineral sources. These medicines mainly came in forms such as decoctions, powders, tablets, and creams, which were the most common types. Huatuo stated that this particular video would focus on herbs. He explained, were natural substances with medicinal effects, including plant roots, stems, bark, fruits, and seeds. Although used in small quantities, they played an important role as compound preparations. Because of that, specific forms of certain preparations could also be referred to as herbs. This meant it was incorrect to define herbs as only one fixed form. Listening to all of this, Siwoo found himself completely lost. He couldn't help wondering what Huatuo was even talking about. If things kept going like this, he felt he would never be able to improve his mastery of the divine art of medicine. The system then notified Siwoo that he had gained high knowledge, increasing his insight skill by 1.4% to 8.7%. Just from watching the video, even that skill had gone up. Suddenly, something clicked for Siwoo. He had a revelation. Stripping Huatuo's explanation down to its core, it all came down to studying medicinal herbs used to treat diseases, along with learning and understanding their effects. The system immediately notified Siwoo that he had correctly understood the definition of herbal medicine, and that his skill level in the divine art of medicine had reached 0.4%. Siwoo was honestly confused by the fact that he had managed to understand it correctly. After that, he couldn't help wondering why Huatuo had to complicate such a simple concept so much. With his mastery now at 0.4%, Siwoo began preparing medicine. He even succeeded in making a decoction that, according to the system, could be beneficial to his body. Staring at the decoction he had made, which honestly looked like straight-up goblin piss, Siwoo questioned whether it was actually edible, and if it was said to be beneficial to his body, didn't that also mean it could potentially be harmful? Even so, he decided to drink it anyway. He lifted the bowl and downed it in one go. The next instant, Siwoo crashed to the floor, spilling the decoction he had prepared everywhere. What hurt the most wasn't the fall, but the amount of money he had spent on all of this. The cost of the herbs alone was insane. Suddenly, Siwoo heard a notification and reached for his phone. After drinking the decoction that was beneficial to his body, his superpower had increased by 0.01%. That result shocked Siwoo. What made it even crazier was that less than 3 seconds had passed since he drank the decoction. He even found himself wondering if he should lick whatever remained of it. Sometime later, the protagonist was seen inside an E-rank dungeon. Vampire bats were E+ ranked monsters belonging to the bat family. There were several reasons he had come here today. First, he planned to shoot a video discussing whether bats were rats. Second, he needed to obtain vampire bat loot to create equipment. Finally, he needed to study the diseases carried by vampire bats. Since they lived in small groups of at least several dozen, sometimes even hundreds, all kinds of diseases thrived among them. However, the most interesting part was that vampire bats themselves were not susceptible to disease. If bats carried illnesses possibly related to blood disorders, then discovering why they were also resistant to them might give him a clue to treating his sister's blood disorder. It would not be easy, but with the divine art of medicine, it was possible. Suddenly, Siwoo sensed something, and it was not bats, it was the sound of footsteps. He immediately jumped higher and hid behind a rock, deciding it would be better to avoid contact just in case. When he identified the source of the footsteps, surprise crossed his mind, because it was Kang Do-chul's sidekicks. The situation did not make sense. As long as the dungeon had been assigned to him by the Hunter Management Bureau, other hunters were not allowed to enter. Coincidences could happen, but it felt unlikely that Kang Do-chul's lackeys had wandered in by accident. These people were around class hunters, which made their presence in an E+ ranked dungeon even more suspicious. Siwoo assumed they had come specifically for him. A dungeon was an isolated space without internet or communication networks, meaning no one would even know if someone died inside. Siwoo briefly considered what he should do, then questioned why he was even thinking about it. After all, everything would become clear once he dealt with them. Meanwhile, the lackeys talked among themselves, confirming that Siwoo had indeed entered the dungeon. Do-una was confident because he had personally seen Siwoo go inside. Kim Ji-woo looked around, wondering why Siwoo was nowhere to be seen. Ji Min-cheol suggested that Siwoo might have already died inside. Kim Ji-woo recalled that Siwoo was a completely useless awakened one, even worse than F-class hunters, and wondered how someone like that could enter a dungeon alone with such confidence. Regardless, it made their task much easier. Ji Min-cheol spread his arms, admitting that while he did not know how Siwoo handled everything else, he was at least smart enough to come up with some kind of strategy against the vampire bats. Kim Ji-woo dismissed the idea, questioning what a talentless person like Siwoo could possibly do. Do-una, however, mentioned that after watching that video, it did not seem like Siwoo relied only on strategy. Ji Min-cheol doubted it, reasoning that the video could easily have been manipulation or computer graphics editing. He even looked around and suggested that this entire place could be a set rather than a real dungeon. Kim Ji-woo agreed that anything was possible. Suddenly, a loud sound echoed through the cave, followed immediately by something rushing past them. Mung Siwoo appeared behind Kim Ji-woo and demanded to know Kang Do-chul's current whereabouts. Kim Ji-woo was terrified, having failed to sense Siwoo's movement at all. Siwoo openly admitted that he had not expected them to reveal information so easily, and noted that he hoped they would not answer him. Taking advantage of the brief moment when Siwoo stood still, Kim Ji-woo leaped aside. Ji Min-cheol demanded to know where Siwoo had come from. Do-una questioned whether Siwoo had chosen to fight them. Kim Ji-woo mocked him, wondering what a useless idiot like Siwoo could possibly do, before rushing forward to finish him off. Before Ji-woo could get close, Siwoo casually waved his hand, knocking the sword out of Ji-woo's grip. He followed up with another strike, sending Kim Ji-woo flying. As Ji-woo tried to stand, a painful sob escaped him. Siwoo reflected on what he was about to do and accepted it without hesitation. He kicked Kim Ji-woo in the head while he lay on the ground. Do-una and Ji Min-cheol were visibly shaken by what they had just witnessed. Ji Min-cheol cursed Siwoo for his actions, but in the very next moment, he found himself pinned against the cave wall. Stunned, Yuna turned toward Min-cheol, realizing that the situation had turned against them. Yuna tried to negotiate, offering to throw away his sword and reveal everything Siwoo wanted to know. Even after hearing this, Siwoo did not stop advancing. Yuna repeated his offer, but Siwoo made it clear that he had no intention of trusting the words of someone who still had all his limbs intact. After finishing the brutal beating, Siwoo turned his attention to Yuna and pressed him for answers, wanting to know whether Kang Do-chul had been the one who ordered them to teach him a lesson. Yuna quietly admitted that it was true. Siwoo then asked whether Yuna wanted to be awarded honorary marks for his honesty. Yuna lifted his swollen face and begged him not to do that, insisting that he was telling the truth. Siwoo demanded to know why Do-chul had done this, and why he was so fixated on him. Yuna admitted that he genuinely did not know. Unhappy with the answer, Siwoo clenched his fist, and when Yuna noticed this, he hurriedly insisted again that he truly knew nothing. Siwoo then asked where Do-chul was currently located. But before Yuna could respond, Siwoo told him to forget the question altogether. He reasoned that Yuna should instead pick up his friends and leave the place. Yuna was shocked, wondering whether Siwoo had really spared them after beating them so severely. Siwoo made it clear that he had not killed them. Siwoo then instructed Yuna to pass along a message to Do-chul, making it clear that the next time, the same thing would happen to him. Siwoo grabbed Yuna by the face and emphasized the message, making sure it would not be difficult for him to repeat it. Sometime later, the crippled Do-una, Ji Min-cheol, and Kim Ji-woo gathered in front of Kang Do-chul. Do-chul was left speechless by the sight of them. At that moment, Mung Siwoo appeared between Do-una and Ji Min-cheol, casually noting that it had been a long time since he and Do-chul had last seen each other, roughly about a month, and even commented on whether Do-chul had been eating well. Kim Ji-woo desperately tried to explain to his boss that everything had been a misunderstanding. Ji Min-cheol followed up by claiming that Siwoo had ordered them to do it, and that the situation was unfair to them. Siwoo wrapped an arm around Yuna in a friendly manner and praised him for his clever plan to lure Kang Do-chul out. Yuna immediately raised his hands in surrender, claiming that he had been set up. Siwoo then told Yuna that he would grant his request to kill that jerk Do-chul. In that instant, Do-una broke free from Siwoo's grasp and ran away. Ji Min-cheol and Kim Ji-woo followed right after him, apologizing to their boss as they fled. Siwoo then turned his attention back to Do-chul and pointed out that Do-chul was now completely alone. He explained that this was exactly why Do-chul should have treated his lackeys better, questioning how badly he must have treated them for them to willingly order his death. Kang Do-chul could not understand how an E-rank hunter like Siwoo could possess such overwhelming power. Siwoo admitted that he himself was not entirely sure, but he said it at just the right moment. He then demanded an answer to one question, asking why Do-chul had treated him this way. Do-chul questioned whether there was any reason he should answer. Siwoo made it clear that there was no obligation at all. Immediately after that, Siwoo leaped toward Dochul and swung his fist. Dochul reacted just in time, swinging his sword to block the attack. The clash made it clear to Siwoo that he could not trust the words of a man with intact limbs. Through this confrontation, Siwoo fully realized how different the situation was, as Dochul was a B-class hunter. Dochul followed up with a horizontal slash, but Siwoo managed to duck under the blade. Dochul could not help but acknowledge the clean dodge. Siwoo jumped back immediately, creating distance between them. He admitted to himself that Dochul's reaction speed was far better than expected. Thinking about Dochul's cruelty and power sent a chill through him. While even a decent blow could shatter a sword, he still lacked the skill to properly block a B-rank hunter's weapon. Dochul pushed off the ground and rushed forward aggressively. His attacks were fast but straightforward, making them possible to dodge. Siwoo crouched low, avoided the strike, and countered with a blow to Dochul's stomach. At that moment, memories surfaced from his past, when he worked as an editor for Do. Back then, he had been treated like a slave in dungeons, and beaten over trivial mistakes. Countless times, he had filmed Dochul fighting monsters, replaying the footage hundreds of times. While editing those videos, he had subconsciously analyzed Dochul's habits, tendencies, and behavior. As a result, Siwoo's insight skill increased by 0.5%, reaching 9.2%. At the last moment, Dochul managed to block Siwoo's fist. Again and again, the two clashed without either gaining the upper hand. Dochul delivered a powerful vertical strike from above, but Siwoo dodged as if he already knew the attack was coming. After so many precise reactions, Dochul began to suspect something unnatural, briefly wondering if Siwoo could read his mind. He immediately dismissed the thought, reminding himself that he was a B-rank hunter, while Siwoo was only A+. Something like that should have been possible only for an S-rank hunter. Seizing the opportunity, Siwoo finally landed a solid punch to Dochul's face. The impact sent Dochul flying backward. He stabbed his sword into the ground and gripped it tightly to stop himself from falling, yet he was still forced back. Dochul trembled in disbelief. It felt impossible. He had studied Siwoo's abilities through YouTube videos, but reality far exceeded what he believed. Dochul suddenly unleashed his energy. His expression twisted as he declared his intent to kill Siwoo that day. Siwoo retreated and raised his hand, making it clear that there was no need to push things this far. Dochul, however, had completely abandoned restraint. With Dochul going all out, Siwoo realized he had no choice but to do the same. Siwoo felt his muscles begin to tear again. Fighting at full strength meant he would not be able to last long. He resolved to give everything he had. Pushing off the ground, he shot forward like lightning. All Dochul managed to perceive was Siwoo's figure appearing in front of him in an instant. A powerful punch followed, triggering a massive explosion across the battlefield. A short time later, the inspection bureau arrived at the destroyed construction site. The commander ordered the area to be sealed off and instructed her subordinates to check for survivors. Several agents stepped forward, announcing their presence and searching the site. As the dust slowly settled, they spotted a man standing with a sword in his hand. The commander asked whether his name was Meng Siwoo. Without stepping off the defeated Kang Dochul beneath him, Siwoo confirmed his identity. The commander then displayed her identification and introduced herself as Lee Min-jung, the commander of the 4th Guard Unit of the Inspection Bureau. She requested that Siwoo accompany them to the bureau. Once inside the bureau, Lee Min-jung confirmed whether she had understood correctly that a hunter named Kang Dochul had attempted to kill him. Siwoo confirmed that this was indeed the case, and stated that he had already submitted video evidence. Lee Min-jung acknowledged that she had reviewed and approved the footage. Although the situation was serious, and not something that could be easily ignored, Hunter Meng Siwoo was listed as an awakened individual without features. The Guarders were essentially the police force responsible for protecting hunters, but in reality, they specialized in hunting down criminal hunters who murdered people. Siwoo had previously heard that squad leaders were appointed from hunters of at least A rank, and the aura radiating from the woman sitting across from him truly resembled that of a killer. Siwoo asked whether the rank of a trait was related to the rank of a hunter. Lee Min-jung responded that she already knew Siwoo was ranked E+. Siwoo confirmed this. Before Lee Min-jung could continue, Siwoo questioned whether there was any reason he needed to answer such inquiries, considering that he was the victim in this situation. Lee Min-jung immediately apologized and explained that due to her line of work, she had developed a habit of suspecting everyone. Based on the video evidence from the Arachne dungeon and the abandoned construction site that Siwoo had submitted, the Bureau would handle everything accordingly. Lee Min-jung stated that Kang Do-chul would never see the light of day again, and suggested ending the investigation at that point. She then thanked Siwoo for his cooperation. The boy opened the door and stated that in that case, he would leave everything in her hands. Moments after Siwoo exited the inspection bureau, the door opened again. A guard entered and appeared surprised that the squad leader was still present, noting that Hunter Meng Siwoo had just left and assuming she would not still be there. Lee Min-jung admitted that the situation was strange. Jung Sua apologized, saying she did not understand what the commander meant. Lee Min-jung then asked Sua about her rank, The sudden question startled her, and she replied that she had recently been promoted to B rank. At that instant, the atmosphere in the room grew unbearably heavy, and Suwa, unable to endure the pressure, collapsed to the floor. Confused and shaken, Suwa looked toward the squad leader. Lee Min-jung commented that, as expected, Suwa could not handle it. Suwa thought that this result should have been obvious, considering the squad leader was no ordinary guarder. With a puzzled expression, Lee Min-jung remarked that Hunter Meng Si-woo had not felt anything at all. Suwa was stunned by this revelation, wondering how that was possible when Si-woo was only an E+ rank hunter. Lee Min-jung agreed, and admitted that it was indeed strange. Suwa questioned why Si-woo had been allowed to leave so easily, especially considering the existence of hunters who concealed their true rank. Lee Min-jung cut her off, explaining that it was because Si-woo was not strange and carried a human scent. Left alone afterward, Suwa quietly wondered what kind of nonsense that explanation was. Meanwhile, Si-woo was walking home. He felt satisfied with how everything had turned out, yet he could not stop thinking about when something like this might happen again. If his YouTube channel continued to grow, he could easily become a target for criminal organizations. At his current level, even dealing with Kang Do-chul had been difficult. Without the accumulated knowledge of Do-chul's habits, behavior patterns, and the assistance of his S+ insight, he would have died much earlier. As he thought about the challenges ahead, his most important trait stood out: his SS-level superpower, which stubbornly refused to increase. Si-woo reflected on why his superpower remained stuck at 1%. Earlier, the system had congratulated him on winning an individual training session with Hercules. It was a free session awarded in celebration of reaching 1 subscriber, something Si-woo considered completely insane. When he checked Hercules' channel, Si-woo was surprised to see that it still had only 1 subscriber. That alone convinced him the reward had to be something significant. Hercules himself was shocked by what he had learned. Seeing his only subscriber, he had assumed it was a human. But the idea of a human accessing his channel made no sense to him. Si-woo asked whether that meant nothing would work. Hercules explained that it was not exactly like that, but if the situation continued, he would not be able to conduct a personal training session. Si-woo wondered whether that meant he would be unable to accept the training at all. Hercules clarified that this was not the case. Since he could not physically go to Si-woo's location, a face-to-face training session was impossible. This led Si-woo to think about how he had even connected to GodTube in the first place. Recalling the blonde man who had left him the smartphone and the white-haired man he had fought, Hercules loudly interjected and explained that even if he could not correct Si-woo's posture in person, he could still teach him properly. He reassured Si-woo not to worry. Through the camera, Hercules observed Si-woo's body and noted that his balance was already excellent, especially his back muscles. Si-woo wondered whether Hercules was referring specifically to his back. Hercules sighed deeply and clarified that the back muscles referred to all muscles on the back of the body, with what he mentioned being only a portion of them. He emphasized that these muscles acted as armor. He listed the trapezius muscles, the triceps, and the brachioradialis. Si-woo was astonished by the sheer number of muscles Hercules described. After learning about proper muscle engagement, Si-woo managed to slightly increase his super strength skill, finally reaching 1.02%. Hercules explained that there were many different types of back muscles, and that because they were located behind the body and could not be seen, people often forgot their importance. He raised his leg and stressed that these muscles were extremely important. Lowering his leg, he stomped the ground and explained that they were essential for maintaining overall body balance during powerful movements. Si-woo was deeply impressed and wondered what he had just witnessed. Hercules asked whether Si-woo had noticed it. He then explained that the technique was called divine martial arts, something he had personally created. Si-woo felt confused by this explanation. Hercules clarified that it was nothing extraordinary, simply a system that combined all of his combat techniques into one. This was the same strike he had used to crush the Hydra, destroying it instantly by striking the center of its head. Regardless, Hercules emphasized that the back muscles were crucial in these techniques and that the lower body served as the foundation supporting everything. He asked Si-woo to consider what would happen if the pillars of a building collapsed during construction. Si-woo understood that the structure would fall apart. Hercules immediately reinforced the comparison, stating that the same principle applied to the human body, before striking the ground once more. Si-woo grasped that if his lower body failed, the same collapse would occur. Hercules concluded by explaining that he would teach an exercise method suited specifically for his subscriber and advised Si-woo to carefully watch and repeat his movements. A little while later, Hercules explained to Si-woo that the basic principle of breathing was to exhale when lifting off the ground. Si-woo mentally noted that this advice sounded far more normal than he had expected. Immediately after that, Hercules abruptly shouted that he did not care about breathing or any other details, and that Si-woo should simply exhale. Completely worn out, Si-woo wondered why this mattered. Hercules advised him to look at himself before questioning anything, emphasizing that for a small fry like him, it was more important to act first without asking questions. During his training with Hercules, Siwoo received numerous system notifications indicating that he had completed superpower exercises. As a result, his superpower skill steadily increased, eventually reaching 1.47%. Siwoo then sent a message to his editor, informing her that the video would be uploaded to YouTube and that the concept for the day's content was a speedrun. He left all editing responsibilities to her. Park Deok-gu thought her boss was a good person, though admittedly a little unusual. Giggling to herself, she wondered what kind of strategy he had come up with this time. She then played the video footage where her boss was standing near the dungeon. Siwoo was dressed in a bat costume and greeted the subscribers of the Conqueror of the World channel. Behind him, inside the cave visible to viewers, vampire bats were living. Anticipating the obvious question, Siwoo explained why he was there. The purpose was to present new content for the Conqueror of the World channel, nothing more than a speedrun raid. Deok-gu decided to begin editing from that point, adding sound effects and visual enhancements. Still, she could not help wondering why he had chosen to film vampire bats. Vampire bats were known for living in harsh environments with poor visibility, and their large numbers made speedrun filming extremely difficult. Then again, this approach would certainly attract attention once more. Siwoo picked up the phone and explained that after conducting research, he had discovered that the current dungeon clearing record of 58 seconds was held by S-rank hunter Yu Hanoi from the Fire Witch channel. He stated that he intended to break that record today. This would be a speedrun raid by the Conqueror of the World channel on the Vampire Bat dungeon, starting immediately. Deok-gu decided to insert a timer for this segment. Suddenly, something unusual caught her attention. Observing the stance her boss was taking, Deok-gu wondered whether he had started doing gymnastics. Siwoo loudly declared the banquet challenge and immediately lowered his leg. The moment his foot touched the ground, a deafening rumble echoed through the dungeon, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Deok-gu was left completely stunned, barely believing what she had just witnessed. Afterward, she wondered whether it was even possible to collapse an entire dungeon. Siwoo slapped himself on the head, reminding himself that he still needed to collect the ingredients. Regardless, the raid was already over. Deok-gu was left wondering in fear what exactly she had just seen, yet she still believed her boss was a good person. After checking his phone, Siwoo was delighted by the astonishing statistics. His channel had already reached 1.4 million views and 6,810 subscribers, and the numbers continued to rise. Even more surprisingly, Yu Hanoi from the Fire Witch channel, who had 41 million subscribers, had left a comment under the video. Siwoo grinned, clearly sensing that she had rushed over in panic after learning that her top position had been taken. The mere fact that the Fire Witch herself had commented already carried tremendous impact. If they ever collaborated, 1 million viewers would be guaranteed. Siwoo forced himself to calm down. At times like this, he needed to become even more provocative with his content. He checked his stats and saw that his superpower level had reached 2.01%. After receiving individual training from Hercules, the skill that had previously refused to increase had now exceeded 2%. With just 2%, he was already capable of destroying a dungeon filled with vampire bats. If his skill increased further, he would not mind asking Hercules to teach him divine martial arts later. After some time passed, Hercules firmly refused Siwoo's request. Siwoo insisted that Hercules teach him during individual training, but Hercules rejected him again. Siwoo reminded him that he had already won, yet Hercules stated that these were entirely different matters. Siwoo wondered what he meant by different, and Hercules explained that individual training and teaching divine martial arts were separate things, each with its own definition. Moreover, for a weakling like Siwoo, building muscle was the primary concern. Divine martial arts were a method Hercules had created to match his own strength, and without sufficient superpowers, Siwoo would not be able to use them. Siwoo stated that he was already using his superpowers, which greatly shocked Hercules. Hercules' projection suddenly expanded in size as he questioned whether Siwoo was truly using his power. Siwoo confirmed that he was, and that Hercules himself was providing personal training. Hercules clarified that personal training simply referred to individual lessons, and was not meant to involve teaching his own superpowers. Siwoo was surprised by this explanation, and reminded Hercules that he had indeed studied his superpowers. Hercules replied that this was impossible. Siwoo then wondered whether it was normal to study the traits of gods on GodTube, or whether what he had studied was not actually Hercules' superpower. Hercules asked Siwoo to wait briefly. Immediately afterward, Hercules used his power to create a projection. Stunned by the sight, Hercules grabbed Siwoo by the shoulders, and questioned how he had accomplished this. He asked whether this meant Siwoo had learned divine powers simply by subscribing to his channel, and whether the same applied to other gods on GodTube. Siwoo admitted that this was indeed the case and remarked that it seemed ridiculous. Hercules shouted that it was absolutely ridiculous. Gaining the powers of real gods merely by subscribing to their channels was complete nonsense. Siwoo calmly noted that it worked for him. Hercules told Siwoo to be quiet for a moment, and pointed out something strange. The real mystery was how Siwoo had managed to connect to GodTube at all. Siwoo was an ordinary person without divinity, Yet he had somehow discovered this opportunity. After listening to Siwoo's story, Hercules reflected on the two individuals Siwoo had encountered earlier. Upon reconsideration, they indeed seemed to be from GodTube. Siwoo wondered whether beings from GodTube could enter their world, given that Hercules had previously stated he could not. Hercules explained that their dimensions could not interfere with each other. He then asked whether Siwoo remembered that his GodTube account was a manager account. If so, one of the individuals Siwoo had met must have been a manager. Siwoo asked whether Hercules knew who the managers on GodTube were. Hercules admitted he knew only a few. Even so, Hercules emphasized that Siwoo should not have been able to obtain divine powers merely by signing up with a manager account. Siwoo wondered whether that was truly the case. Hercules explained that if such a thing were possible, managers would have no trouble becoming gods of the universe themselves. Nevertheless, he was certain that Siwoo had somehow obtained divine powers. Siwoo smiled tensely and asked Hercules to take him as a disciple, but Hercules refused again. Siwoo questioned why he continued to refuse. Hercules replied that it was too troublesome. Siwoo reminded him that he had already mastered divine powers, but Hercules countered that these were different matters altogether. Even providing individual training was already bothersome, and adding divine martial arts on top of that was unacceptable. Seeing how firm Hercules was, Siwoo decided to ask one final question. He wondered what subscribers on GodTube truly represented. Hercules was puzzled and, after a brief pause, explained that subscribers could be understood as a form of divinity. Siwoo interpreted this to mean that the more subscribers one had, the higher their divine status became. While he did not fully grasp the concept, he understood that more subscribers were generally better. This was why Hercules continued to provide individual training despite finding it annoying. Subscribers were the only thing Hercules cared about besides muscles. With that in mind, Siwoo proposed a deal. If he could help Hercules gain 100 subscribers, then Hercules would have to teach him divine martial arts. Hercules wondered how Siwoo could possibly accomplish that, considering he could not even reach him physically. Leaning closer to Hercules' small figure, Siwoo questioned why Hercules would not trust him, and gave him a thumbs up. Shortly afterward, Hercules' channel skyrocketed to 34,241 views and 127 subscribers. Hercules reappeared before Siwoo and bowed deeply, addressing him as master. He declared that from that day onward, he would become Siwoo's loyal servant. Siwoo promised that he would continue providing interesting video ideas, which strengthened Hercules' resolve. Siwoo reminded him that in return, Hercules must teach him divine martial arts. Kneeling, Hercules questioned whether he even dared refuse. Siwoo asked what the number of subscribers truly represented. Hercules explained that it was a form of trust. Divine status was built upon the trust of others, meaning the more people knew about them, the stronger they became, followed by lengthy explanations. All Siwoo understood was that the system was extremely complicated. Divine status increased with subscribers, though he was still unsure whether he fully understood it. Regardless, Hercules promised to teach him divine martial arts immediately. Siwoo requested that Hercules speak calmly again before proceeding. Hercules agreed and suggested starting right away. The first requirement for learning divine martial arts was not physical strength but training the muscles of the brain. Rather than explaining further, Hercules decided to demonstrate. Suddenly, Siwoo's head began to ache as if it were splitting apart, the result of Hercules striking the air. Siwoo struggled to comprehend what was happening. No matter how hard he tried, he could not perceive Hercules' movements at all. An overwhelming pressure pressed down on him. The system notified Siwoo that he had mastered Hercules' divine martial arts. His superpower skill increased dramatically by 1.1%, reaching 3.61%. Siwoo was stunned. A skill that had previously increased by only 0.1% had now surged by over 1% in a single moment. Even more astonishing, it had reached SSS rank. Hercules cautioned that Siwoo could not handle it yet. He explained that Siwoo's soul level was still insufficient, and that using divine martial arts in this state would overload his mind. He needed to develop his brain muscles first. In simpler terms, brain muscles represented the level of the soul, or mental strength. Without a strong psyche, mastering divine martial arts was impossible. Siwoo wondered whether Hercules could have explained this earlier. Hercules apologized, admitting that he did not talk much. Siwoo interrupted and asked whether he would still be able to learn it. Hercules admitted that under normal circumstances it would be impossible, but since it was Siwoo, it might be possible. Siwoo asked what he meant. Hercules reminded him that Siwoo could obtain the powers of gods. At that moment Siwoo understood. If he could obtain the power of a god, specializing in mental strength to support Hercules' immense power, then gods such as Jesus, Buddha, or Confucius could be potential options. Hercules recommended Master Confucius's channel. This meant subscribing to the channel and paying a monthly fee. Checking his balance, Siwoo grimaced. He had only 153 million won. Subscribing to Huatuo's channel had already cost him 100 million, with a monthly fee of 1 billion. The situation was absurd and clearly unprofitable. Siwoo was not in the mood to decide. The question of whether it was truly the right decision lingered heavily in his mind. Suddenly, Kim Seon entered the forge and raised her hand to signal that she had returned. She then handed Siwoo the attendance item he had wanted so desperately. The boy immediately asked about the price. Previously, she had mentioned that it would cost 1 million won, but this time Kim Seon stated that the cost was 113 million won. After parting with another 113 million won, the boy thanked Seon with tears welling in his eyes. Kim Seon politely thanked him for using Seon's products. Siwoo's current account balance dropped to 40,450,000 won. Seon then asked what Siwoo planned to do with the ogre tendons. He explained that this time, he intended to make equipment. The ogre was an A+ ranked monster, which meant he was still unable to hunt one alone. Even so, if he wanted to learn divine martial arts, he would need 1 billion won. That meant using high-quality materials to create high-quality equipment and selling it. Through this process, he would also gain experience so that he could eventually make equipment for himself. Thinking about how far away that future still was, Siwoo cried again. Money remained his eternal enemy. Even so, he decided to begin immediately. Returning to the forge, So Palguang felt an intense wave of heat and heard the steady sound of hammer strikes. As he approached Kim Seon, Palguang asked what had brought her there. Kim Seon, however, was so shocked by what she saw that she did not respond. Palguang then turned his gaze toward Siwoo and froze, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Siwoo had finished creating the equipment and smiled as he watched it gleam. The system notified him that he had produced a disposable product, which caused his metallurgy skill to increase significantly by 5%, reaching 10.43%. Despite pouring everything into it, the result was still only a disposable item, which left him dissatisfied. As soon as he finished, Palguang and Kim Seon rushed over, both amazed by his work and eager to know how he had accomplished it. Siwoo instead asked Seon how much the equipment could sell for, which greatly puzzled her. She wondered whether he truly intended to sell it at all. Equipment of such caliber was far beyond her means, and none of their customers could afford something like this. Hearing this, Siwoo felt disheartened. There seemed to be no point in crafting the gloves if he could not even sell them. Even so, he told Seon not to worry and asked her to sell the gloves on his behalf anyway, reminding her that they were disposable items. Seon was startled by the idea of such gloves being called disposable, but since Siwoo had entrusted them to her, she promised to do her best. She told him to leave everything to her, and then turned to Palguang to ask permission to use his name. Kim Seon explained that she was planning to put the gloves up for auction. Sometime later, inside the auction hall, the auctioneer announced the next item. The announcer stated that the upcoming lot was equipment that even Master So Palguang could not help but admire. The guests immediately began whispering, as everyone knew that So Palguang was a blacksmith recognized by Aurelian. The auctioneer removed the cloth covering the item and revealed a pair of high-quality gloves. The auctioneer explained that the gloves were crafted from ogre tendons, making them extremely durable and eliminating concerns about accidental breakage during combat. The audience was told not to be surprised, as the materials came from an A-rank monster. According to the appraisal results, the gloves were capable of strengthening their wearer. As soon as this was mentioned, a murmur swept through the hall. Many believed the gloves to be enchanted equipment, something only Master Aurelian was capable of creating. The auctioneer smiled awkwardly and clarified that the gloves were not enchanted. Instead, they provided a slight enhancement of approximately 5 stat points. Even so, they were still equipment with a special effect and functioned similarly to auxiliary equipment. Judging by the growing excitement in the room, the auctioneer thought that dragging things out any longer would likely provoke the crowd, and she moved to begin the bidding. The starting price was set at 10 million won, with increments of 5 million won. Almost immediately, bids began pouring in, rising from 10 million to 15, 20, and 25 million won. The competition intensified, and within seconds the price climbed to 50 million won. At that point, the auctioneer announced that future bids would increase by 10 million won. As if it were nothing, the price rapidly escalated through 60, 70, 80, 90, and then 100 million won. The bidding rules were then changed again, increasing each bid by 50 million won. Even this failed to slow the momentum, and the price surged to 250 million won. Moments later, the gloves reached 350 million won, and the hall fell into a brief silence. Scanning the room, the auctioneer asked whether there were any higher bids. Suddenly, one guest called out a bid of 2 billion won. The audience turned in shock to see Han Charon. The auctioneer was visibly shaken by the sudden jump in price, and repeated the bid of 2 billion won, asking again for higher offers. Almost immediately, another bid came in at 2.1 billion won. The crowd gasped upon realizing that the bidder was Lee Minjung. Whispers spread rapidly as people recognized her as the butcher, Lee Minjung. Han Charon raised the price again to 3 billion won. Gritting her teeth, Lee Minjung countered with 3.1 billion. As if she had been waiting for it, Han Charon declared a bid of 4 billion won. The auctioneer repeated the final bid of 4 billion won and began the final count. With no further bids, The gloves were officially sold for 4 billion won. Having secured the item she wanted, Han Charon was clearly very pleased. Sometime later, at the Seo family's blacksmith shop, Siwoo stood trembling in shock. Kim Seon was just as stunned and openly admitted that she had never once imagined the gloves would sell for such an outrageous price. From the auctioned gloves, Siwoo received 3,600,000,000 won, an amount that felt completely unreal. The winning bid had been 4 billion won, and even after deducting the 5% auction commission and Seon's service fee, a staggering 3.6 billion won remained in his account. Overwhelmed by emotion, Siwoo suddenly hugged Kim Seon tightly and shouted his thanks for her. Kim Seon immediately protested, urging him to stop because he was squeezing her too hard. Realizing what he was doing, Siwoo quickly released her. As she tried to catch her breath, he explained that he had simply been too excited. Wanting to show his gratitude, Siwoo offered to give her something in return for her troubles. Kim Seon refused, explaining that he had already paid her fairly for her services. More importantly, thanks to him, Seon's company had become a VIP client at the auction house, which was more than enough for her. Hearing this, Siwoo then offered to help Seo Palguang instead, but Palguang refused as well. He explained that he did not mind because Siwoo had done everything himself, while he had done nothing at all. Siwoo then decided that he would teach Seo Palguang how to play the Allegro rhythm, something he had recently learned from a video by Hephaestus. He also mentioned a 4-beat rhythm that would likely suit him just as well. After that, the most important moment came when Siwoo picked up his phone and paid for a subscription to the Confucius channel, losing 1 billion won in the process. He had no choice but to subscribe, as learning divine martial arts required it. There was no room for being stingy. Even so, the amount was enormous. The poor boy barely managed to hold back his tears as he stared at his new subscription, fully aware of how much it had cost him. Sometime later, Soa cautiously asked her brother whether this place was too expensive, and added that they did not have to eat there. Siwoo explained that they were there because experiences like this had to be tried at least once in a lifetime. The cost was 600,000 won per person, but he did not mind. Even after everything, he still had 2.6 billion won left in his account. With his subscriptions to the Huatuo and Confucius channels, he was now spending 1.1 billion won monthly on subscriptions alone. To take his mind off those expenses, Siwoo decided to have a drink. While waiting for their food, he chose to watch GodTube. Meanwhile, Soa looked around with curiosity, since it was her first time being in such a luxurious place. Siwoo opened the Confucius channel and immediately read the description. It stated that, although Confucius was slow and unable to speak, he was quick in action and had over 34,000 subscribers. Siwoo assumed that this was a large number and wondered whether all of Confucius's students had subscribed. That thought led him to realize that school-like networks also existed on GodTube. Earlier, Hercules had explained that studying divine martial arts required brainpower. Based on that, Siwoo believed this discipline to be SSS rank. Since it was not combat-related, an SSS rank implied a level even higher than divine martial arts. If he wanted to improve his skill level, he would need to carefully watch the videos and understand them as deeply as possible. Siwoo started with the first video on the main page, titled, The Dignity of a Gentleman. In the video, Confucius was calmly resting in a garden pavilion, and explained that a gentleman was someone who cared for and protected those around him. While watching, Siwoo immediately felt something. He felt extremely bored. Even so, he still managed to grasp the fundamentals of Confucianism and the levels of benevolence, righteousness, propriety, and wisdom of an SSS-ranked gentleman increased slightly. Hercules had pointed out that even though Siwoo had acquired the brain power of Master Confucius, he had not done so completely. Siwoo had admitted this and acknowledged that his level of mastery was still lacking. Hercules had then explained that divine martial arts were not something Siwoo could currently use. In simpler terms, it was similar to altering the laws of the world, rather than merely activating a superpower. To use divine martial arts, Siwoo would have to draw on mana by concentrating on veins and pressure points. Mana itself was the source of existence. To manipulate it more effectively, he would need an amplifying organ, something that could project intention and influence mana directly. Eastern gods referred to this as the center of Qi. Judging by Siwoo's expression, Hercules assumed that he found all of this unbearably boring, and likely had no idea what was being explained. Suddenly, a flash burst from the phone screen, startling Siwoo and making him instinctively cover himself. Hercules then poked him on the head and pointed out that Siwoo wanted to learn divine martial arts and gain that power, but had no interest in studying complicated theories. Hercules questioned whether he was wrong. Even if Siwoo wanted to deny it, he knew he could not. Siwoo admitted that Hercules was completely right. Hercules stated that this reaction was exactly what he had expected, and revealed that he had already devised a way to help Siwoo master divine martial arts more easily. The solution, once again, lay in muscles. Not understanding how everything kept circling back to this, Siwoo was left confused. Hercules explained that if the body was weak, the mind would inevitably suffer. Siwoo considered whether the opposite might be true, but Hercules countered that as Siwoo strengthened his body, his mind would naturally begin to grasp complex concepts on its own. Hercules flexed his muscles and advised Siwoo to leave all headache-inducing knowledge to his muscles instead. Faced with that explanation, Siwoo was left completely speechless. The scene then shifted to the SH Group headquarters. Mr. Han Taeson spoke to his granddaughter, mentioning that he had heard she had purchased new equipment. Han Charon confirmed that this was true, and admitted that she was very satisfied with it. Mr. Han added that he had also heard the equipment had cost 4 billion won. Charon acknowledged this and explained that, although it could not be compared to Master Aurelian's sword, it was still outstanding auxiliary equipment. Simply wearing a single piece made her feel as though her overall abilities had risen to an entirely new level. The chairman expressed his satisfaction at hearing this, and told her to inform him if she needed anything else. Charon thanked her grandfather and bowed respectfully. She then stated that she believed they could begin. Hearing this, the chairman's expression immediately turned serious, as his granddaughter was referring to an S-rank dungeon raid. The scene returned to the protagonist, who was found lying on the ground in complete exhaustion, unable to keep up with even a fraction of Hercules' movements. Siwoo clearly understood that he still had a long way to go in mastering divine martial arts. He picked up his phone and stared at his statistics with disappointment. The most discouraging part was that his level would not increase. He wondered whether it ever would. A dignitary once asked Confucius whether there was a way to avoid losing a battle that could never be won. Confucius had replied that there was, and that the answer was to never end the fight. Hercules himself had once been a man, a hero who surpassed a god while still in human form. Surely, Hercules must have struggled, fought, and felt disappointment along the way. Divine martial arts were not simply a method of combat, but a force so overwhelming that it made one question whether a human could ever truly achieve it. Siwoo realized that he was not talented at all, which meant that the only thing he could rely on was endless effort. Taking a fighting stance, he began punching forward, repeating Hercules' movements over and over. Each strike generated a powerful gust of wind, and unyielding will filled his body. The gentleman's attributes of benevolence, righteousness, propriety, and wisdom increased by 0.5%. When Siwoo opened his eyes, he was stunned by what he saw. With his final strike, he successfully mastered Hercules' divine martial art, completely destroying the surrounding park in the process. He let out an awkward chuckle, realizing that he would now need to find himself a private training facility. Elsewhere, Diogu sighed as she received another message from her boss. Based on the description, it appeared to be another video involving vampire bats, similar to the previous one. The Fire Witch had reclaimed first place on her channel with a record-breaking time of 11 seconds. It was an astonishing feat, with her attack ending almost as soon as it began. Despite that, Siwoo had uploaded a video with the same concept yet again. The file finished downloading, and Dioku opened it. This time, Siwoo appeared dressed in a witch costume, greeting the viewers of the channel. He reminded them once more that he was the man who conquered everything in the world, the conqueror of the world. Looking directly at the smartphone screen, he mentioned that he had heard a new record had recently been set on the Fire Witch's channel, 11 seconds, a truly incredible achievement. Because of that, he stated that he would once again attempt to defeat Fire Witch Yu Honghan's record and demonstrate how it was done. As Dioku continued watching, she found herself increasingly shocked by what unfolded. Siwoo had clearly returned to his usual reckless style. He explained that viewers might be wondering why he had suddenly set his sights on Miss Yu Han. If he openly targeted her, he would likely be roasted online. That meant he could not act without preparation. That was why he intended to reveal his strategy: how to defeat Miss Yu Han, the current record holder. With that, he announced that it was time to stop the pointless talk and finally begin. Siwoo sharply lifted his leg and slammed it into the ground with all his strength. Immediately afterward, the camera lens cracked, and the video abruptly cut off. Diogu was stunned by how suddenly everything ended. Deciding to double-check, she noticed that her boss had sent her 2 videos. When she opened the second file, she was shocked all over again. At the exact moment Siwoo kicked the ground, the gate behind him warped violently, and the camera fell. Massive cracks spread across the ground from the point of impact, leading to the complete destruction of the dungeon. Dioku was left utterly speechless, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. Her body trembled as she checked the video duration once more, and discovered that it was only 4 seconds long. A short while later, Siwoo's new video had already surpassed over 350k views, and his subscriber count had climbed to 11,000. Thanks to divine martial arts, both views and comments skyrocketed. At this pace, earning hundreds of millions no longer seemed like an impossible dream. While scrolling through the comments beneath the video, something unexpected caught his attention. One user mentioned that this level of power should be enough to attack the dungeon where Han Charon had failed. Siwoo was taken aback by this claim. Opening the comment thread, he saw numerous users expressing surprise and discussing the topic. At first, he assumed it was just a rumor. Then another user stated that they had verified the information, and that multiple articles were already circulating online. Siwoo was startled. If articles truly existed, then what would happen to the SH group after failing an S-rank dungeon raid? At around 1 in the afternoon, news had broken that the chairwoman of the SH Hunters Guild, Han Charon, had failed an S-rank dungeon raid. Fortunately, there were no casualties, but many people expressed disappointment. The SH group, in particular, was in a grim state as they had recently invested heavily in the hunting industry with dreams of entering the broader market. That ambition was now effectively crushed. As a result, their stock prices plummeted. Siwoo searched for more details, but none of the reports explained exactly how Han Charon had failed. After reading through everything, he wondered how this situation was related to him at all. Tossing his phone onto the bed, he decided that he did not have the time to worry about her situation. Han Charon could deal with her own problems. He was far too busy handling his own. At the top floor of the SH Group headquarters, Han Charon arrived and was immediately told that someone had decided to visit them. Charon greeted the director of the SH Group, Han Mina. The director remarked that it had been a long time since they had last seen each other and asked how Charon had been doing. With a gentle smile, she asked Charon to look at her, and then wondered whether she was returning after meeting with the chairman. Charon confirmed that she had indeed met with him, and asked her aunt whether she had also gone to see him. Mina explained that the chairman had called an executive meeting. At that moment, SH Group was in complete turmoil. Not only had their stock prices plummeted, but investors were also rapidly withdrawing their funds. Han Mina emphasized that this situation was not solely Charon's fault. In truth, the executives themselves were to blame for placing excessive expectations on her. As Mina prepared to leave, she told Charon that she could go as well. Otherwise, she would have to face her brothers. After Mina departed, Charon was left standing alone in the hallway, lost deep in thought. Sometime later, Soa drank Siwoo's newly prepared decoction and nearly vomited from its taste. Siwoo gave an awkward smile and suggested that the bitterness was normal. Despite that, Siwoo was pleased to see that his S+ rank Divine Medical Arts continued to improve, having already reached 20.47%. This time, the decoction was noticeably more palatable than before. After studying the gentleman's mind, all of Siwoo's attributes began to improve at a faster rate. Not only divine martial arts, but also super strength, insight, and even divine metallurgy became easier to develop. Among them, insight showed the greatest growth, reaching 24.8%, an 8% increase due to its connection with all his other traits. Reflecting on this, Siwoo realized that the gentleman's mind did not possess an SSS rank without reason. After Soa finished drinking the decoction, Siwoo could already see her complexion beginning to improve. This confirmed that his treatment was truly effective, filling him with happiness. If he continued improving his divine art of medicine, he was confident that he would eventually cure Soa's illness. The only lingering problem was money. The minimum subscription fee of 1.1 billion won weighed heavily on him. The 1.7 billion won remaining in his account was far from sufficient to cover the monthly subscriptions to Huatuo and Confucius. Siwoo looked at his improved decoction and briefly thought about how great it would be if he could sell it. However, medical preparations could not be sold freely without proper medical certification. He decided that he would ask Kim Seon about this matter later. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Expecting no visitors, Siwoo wondered who it could be. The person outside apologized for the interruption and asked whether this was the residence of Mr. Meng Siwoo. The visitor then introduced himself as Kang Min-jae, the personal secretary of Miss Han Charon. After welcoming him inside, Siwoo listened as Kang Min-jae explained that the young lady wished to challenge the S-rank dungeon once again. Hearing that Charon intended to return to the dungeon, Siwoo assumed that she required his assistance. He sought to clarify whether she wanted him to devise a strategy for the raid. The secretary confirmed this. Siwoo then asked what had occurred during the first attempt to clear the dungeon. Kang Min-jae apologized, admitting that he did not know the details himself. The only instruction he had received was that Meng Siwoo's help was absolutely necessary. He added that the young lady had originally wanted to come in person, but because so many people were watching her, she was unable to do so. He bowed apologetically and asked whether Siwoo would be willing to speak with her. At that moment, Siwoo could already sense it. The sweet scent of money filled his mind, thinking, a joint raid between the conqueror of the world and Han Charon in an S-rank dungeon would inevitably attract millions of views on YouTube. Later, inside the SH Group headquarters gym, Siwoo arrived and immediately saw Han Charon practicing with a sword. She was wearing the gloves he had personally created. Completely focused on her training, Charon failed to notice anyone entering the gym and continued swinging her sword. The secretary informed Siwoo that he would call her over, but Siwoo stopped him and suggested waiting. Siwoo recognized that Han Charon had entered a trance-like state during her training. Training with such deep concentration was extremely beneficial, something he could say with confidence after experiencing it himself recently. The secretary attempted to argue, but the boy explained that although waiting might take some time, this was a rare opportunity for Charon. She continued training, entirely unaware of her surroundings. While watching, Siwoo noticed that her movements lacked any real system. He speculated that this realization came from his improved understanding gained through S+ insight and divine martial arts. To him, Charon's sword swings were nothing more than random arm movements. He had also heard that she had never formally learned sword techniques. One of Han Charon's traits was S-rank sword talent, yet her talent was overshadowed by excessive roughness. It felt similar to someone possessing SS-rank superpowers without having learned divine martial arts to properly channel them. If Charon could learn proper martial arts, her growth would be immense. The only true path for her development would be joining a sect as a disciple. However, there was no realistic way that could happen. The SH group would never allow it. If Han Charon became a sect disciple, she would no longer belong to the SH group. Sometimes, a good background was not always beneficial. Observing Charon's current level, Siwoo wondered whether she could maintain martial arts even if she learned them from GodTube. Several channels came to his mind. King Arthur, the legendary Knight of the Round Table, featured in the Excalibur video. Siegfried, the first dragon slayer, now offering advice on how to kill dragons. Xiang Yu, the invader who led tens of thousands of men and forced Liu Bang to sing the Song of the Han Dynasty in one video. Their content was undeniably extreme, but Siwoo could not help thinking about what would happen if Han Charon learned their martial arts. The problem was that Charon could not access GodTube, meaning she would never learn swordsmanship that way. At that moment, an idea struck Siwoo. He could watch the videos himself, and then teach Charon directly. Although it would require expensive subscription fees, he could simply charge her for it. Whether it was 1 billion or 10 billion made little difference to the granddaughter of the SH group. Just thinking about the money made Siwoo start drooling. This was undeniably a golden deal backed by Charon's overwhelming financial power. There was only one problem. Would Han Charon, an S-rank hunter, truly accept lessons from him, a D-rank hunter? On top of that, he could only teach her techniques he had already learned himself. That led Siwoo to confront a serious question. Was it even possible to teach divine martial arts to someone after learning them personally? Still, if he gave up now, everything would be meaningless. Meanwhile, Charon finished her training and approached the secretary, remarking that she should have been warned that Meng Siwoo had arrived. The secretary apologized and explained that he had not interrupted her because Mr. Siwoo specifically requested not to disturb her training. Charon appeared slightly surprised by this. Siwoo stared at Charon and suddenly blushed, leaving him unable to speak. Charon, also blushing, stated that she would go wash up first before leaving. Watching her go, Siwoo had to admit to himself that Han Charon was extremely beautiful. Later, in a calmer setting, Charon apologized for making Siwoo wait for so long. Siwoo explained that it had not been that long, and mentioned that he had heard she needed his help. He then asked what had happened during her dungeon raid. Charon bent forward slightly and revealed that there were no monsters inside the dungeon. This revelation shocked Siwoo. Charon clarified that although there were no monsters initially, they did encounter one eventually. Based on her explanation, Siwoo concluded that there had indeed been a single monster. Recalling its predatory gaze, Charon explained that, while the creature resembled a wolf, it was difficult to even call it a monster. She had never seen anything like it before. Siwoo reflected on this. Wolf-type monsters were highly diverse, but as far as he knew, wolf monsters had never appeared in S-rank dungeons. As she continued speaking, Charon began to tremble. She admitted that she had been completely powerless against it. Considering it was an S-rank dungeon and she possessed A+ level strength, she should not have been saying something like that. Siwoo asked whether she truly could not handle it, and she immediately confirmed it. Siwoo remembered that Charon had not entered the dungeon alone. She had been accompanied by elite team members equipped with powerful gear, yet even then, they had failed. Worse still, this was not just a simple failure, it was something entirely beyond their capacity. Siwoo summarized the situation internally. There had been only one monster in the dungeon, and that monster was so powerful that even Han Charon could not fight it. Dungeon rank was determined by the total mana contained within it, which was why dungeons were almost never classified based on a single monster. However, in extremely rare cases, a dungeon could revolve around a single entity. This phenomenon was known as a mutation, or more precisely, a capo monster. A capo monster was a creature that possessed all the mana within a dungeon. If Charon's team had encountered such a being, her failure made perfect sense. A capo monster was already terrifying on its own, and the worst part was that it was S-rank. Siwoo explained that he believed they had encountered a capo monster. Charon was surprised, admitting that it was the first time she had ever heard of such a thing. Siwoo suggested that abandoning the dungeon altogether would be the wiser choice, and questioned whether she truly needed to challenge it again. After all, dying over it would not be worth it. However, Charon insisted that she had to succeed. Siwoo asked her why it mattered so much. She explained that she was not the only one affected. Siwoo immediately understood. Due to Charon's failed raid, the SH group had suffered massive losses. He had already heard that hundreds of billions of won vanished within minutes of the first articles being published. To prevent further collapse in stock prices, Charon needed to resolve the situation. She had to succeed in the dungeon raid as quickly as possible. It was undeniably dangerous, but trillions of won were worth risking her life for. The S-class boss monster, a completely unknown entity, would be extremely difficult to defeat. Siwoo stated that he understood everything. However, he had one condition. He extended his hand with a smile and requested permission to shoot a video for his YouTube channel. Charon was taken aback by the request. Siwoo then demanded an additional 10 billion won. With a business-like smile, he made it clear that he would not go any lower. A short time later, Siwoo received an advance payment of 1 billion won. Looking at the deposit, he considered himself lucky, and even thought he should have asked for more. Still, the fact that she agreed so easily surprised him. He decided to drop the thought, and reminded himself not to be too greedy, since 10 billion was already an enormous sum. Now, his focus shifted to the true problem, the S-class capo monster that no one had ever seen before. Siwoo was not even certain whether he could devise a proper strategy. Asking for too much would only increase the burden. However, his insight had already reached 24%. That meant analysis was possible. Siwoo told himself that no matter what, he could do it.